version of you that you're working to earn, the version of you that you're working to earn, you can actually inhabit that version right now. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Rethink Podcast. Guys, welcome in. My name is Kelly. I am your host. I'm always very humbled that you take the time to, hang out with me. So welcome aboard. If you are new here, welcome. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't forget who we are and where we are. Those of you that's been hanging out with me for a while, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. We've really built a very strong community from coast to coast. This is an international and internationally listened to podcast. And you would be surprised to know a very large part of our audience comes from outside of the U.S., from which I am an inhabitant of. But our folks in China and South Africa and New South Wales and Australia and in South America, our folks in Canada, our folks in Japan, thank you so much for supporting the podcast and consistently supporting, particularly our people in New South Wales and in Australia. Thank you guys so much. Such dedicated listeners, really do appreciate it. Please, if you do want to support the podcast, we appreciate it. Go into the show notes. You can become a member of the podcast. You'll get some benefits, and it'll take you to our website and tell you what all is involved in that. But we've got some products that can really help you to improve your life and your way of thinking. We have courses and we have digital products or solutions, as I like to call them, to just everyday questions and things and practices and routines that can really help you. So take a look in the show notes, and if anything strikes your fancy, we'd appreciate your support. So let's jump into it. Rethink, just in case you're new, Rethink Podcast is about conscious living and personal transformation. It's not hustle. It's not grinding. It's not some grind towards a better version of yourself, but actually pausing, looking at who you are and looking at how you're thinking more than anything, looking at how you're thinking and gently shifting that perspective. This is not going to be some flash of lightning or thunder that's going to hit you from out of the clouds. But it's going to be a more gentle way of shifting your thinking. You're going to get results because as a man thinketh, so is he. That's what we do here in a nutshell. So today's episode is one that I've been sitting on for a little while, if I'm being honest. And I want to start it off with a question. This is not something that you need to answer right away. You don't need to answer it out loud. And as a matter of fact, we're going to kind of talk through this together. Okay? So here's the question. When do you plan to feel like the person you're becoming? When do you plan to feel like the person you're becoming? Is it after you hit a certain number? After you build a certain thing? After a certain amount of time has passed? After the proof arrives for most of us, right? For a lot of people that are listening right now, the honest answer is something like, when it finally all comes together. I'll know when I know, when I finally feel ready, or when I'm finally done enough. And who knows what enough actually is, right? That's exactly what I want to look at today, because I think that the word finally is costing most of us so much time and more than we realize. And I think that there's a different way, a more grounded way to approach who we are becoming. So today's episode is entitled, You're Already Who You're Trying to Become. Quite simple. You're already who you're trying to become. Before I get too far into this, I don't want, if this is above your, if this frustrates you, this sort of conversation, maybe this conversation isn't for you yet. Okay. The first time I listened to Neville Goddard, the first time I listened to Eckhart Tolle, the first time I listened to Sadhguru, or even, in any of the folks in the space, particularly Eckhart Tolle, it was frustrating because I didn't quite understand what he was saying. I came back to it in 6 months, eight months, and I read it, and I completely understood what he was saying. There's certain times where you're open to receiving certain messages and to having the conversations. And so if this is frustrating you, I would say don't listen. Don't listen. Pick a different podcast to listen to, because this is for a particular group of people in a particular space. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I don't want you to think I'm playing word games with you. I don't want you to think I'm wordsmithing and just trying to, get clicks and listens and stuff like that. Believe me, that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. If it is frustrating to you, I would suggest that you listen to it at a different time. But I do know that my audience hears this and can understand the slight differences in what I'm saying, and I'm going to repeat it. The question that we're going to answer today is, when do you plan to feel like the person that you're becoming? That makes perfect sense if you've kind of been following the messaging of the podcast for a while. When do you plan on feeling like that person? And so today's episode is called You're Already Who You're Trying to Become. And that again flows with what we've been talking about for a long time here in the podcast. So we're going to move through this in a few sections. First, I want to talk about a model of the, personal growth that most of us absorb without even being asked, that we agree with it or not. That's programming. And then secondly, I want to bring in some of Neville's teaching, particularly the law of assumption, specifically what he said about self-concepts and how our identity shapes our experience. And just so you know, we've got a whole course, 30 days to develop a new self-concept. So we get to the end of this, you think that's something that you want, something that can be helpful, and it will, just go to our website and you can purchase it and download it today. Thirdly, I'm going to give you a practice. You don't ever leave our podcast without having some sort of practice, okay? We're here to give to you, to help you. And this is all because you listen to the podcast. It's not going to cost you anything. I'm going to give you a practice, something that is concrete but gentle, that you can start doing today, and you're going to be seeing results very soon. And in the end, I'm going to share something that I've created for this community that I think that you're going to really find very, very useful. So please, let's go ahead and jump into it and stay to the end. So the question, we've stated it. Let me do this. Let me describe something you probably recognize, even if you have never put it into words. There's a model of personal growth that most of us have inherited. Nobody handed it to us and said, hey, here's how you become a better person. We just somehow absorbed it from school, from the way achievement was celebrated around us, from every motivational framework that we've ever encountered. We just assumed it to be the case. The model looks like this. You do the work, you get the result, and you become the person. You celebrate. That's the sequence. That's kind of what we've been used to. You go to high school, you get the diploma, you celebrate. You go to college, you do the work, you graduate, and you celebrate. That's kind of been the modus operandi. First, you earn the credentials, then you feel like an expert. First you build the audience, then you feel like a creator who people are listening to. First, you lose the weight, or you make the money, or you finish the project, and then finally you get to feel like the version of yourself that you've been trying to work toward. It's logical, absolutely a logical process. So I'm not, stating that it's not. Very logical. It makes sense on the surface. And for a lot of people, it produces real movement, real accomplishment, real milestones. But here's what I've noticed in my own life and in the lives of people who do this sort of work or in this space. When the milestones arrive, okay, stay with me. When the milestones arrive, the feelings don't always come with it. You hit a number, you launch a thing, a business, let's say, you finish a program, a coursework, or whatever it is, and there's a moment, sometimes a real one, where it feels good, where you think, okay, I did it. But then fairly quickly, that feeling fades away And what's left isn't a settled sense of having accomplished or having arrived. It's a new gap. Like, okay, on to the next thing. A new thing to accomplish before the next version of finally. In other words, you keep moving the finally. Is there a finally? Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound familiar to you? And if it does, I don't want you to hear that as a failure, because something we all go through. I don't want you to hear it as a failure of effort or a failure, of desire. I want you to hear it as a signal that maybe the model itself has a flaw, the way that we think about this model. And the flaw, it could be this. Just put your thinking cap on. The model assumes that the identity flows, the model assumes that the identity follows achievement. The model assumes that the identity follows achievement, that you become the person after the proof shows up. Only then. But what if that's backwards, or what if that's not completely correct? What if identity doesn't follow achievement? What if identity precedes achievement? What if identity is the whole reason why you're achieving in the first place? So stay with me, because this is where Neville Goddard's work comes in. And if you're not familiar with his work, that's okay. We're going to go through, this conceptually as if to just introduce you to Neville. But those of you who have been to my audience for a long time, you know that I quote Neville Goddard quite often. You don't need any prior knowledge necessarily. You just need to be willing to consider a different way of thinking. And that's really what this podcast is about. If you're not willing to do that, yes, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And two, you're not going to want to listen very long. Neville Goddard. All right. He was a teacher and a mystic who worked, in the 1940s to the 1960s. He did a series of talks throughout the years. His ideas have had very powerful resurgence in the last several years, particularly thanks to social media and different gurus in the space, like people who I stated before, like Abraham and Bassar and folks like that. I think the reason is quite simple. What he's saying is something that most personal development frameworks still haven't caught up to yet. And things that he said in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s were very, very much ahead of their time in many ways. He said, for example, you don't get what you want, you get who you are. That is not a new set of words. That is something he said a long time ago. And really, that wasn't unique to him. That had been said before, as a man thinking, so is he. Let me kind of go back. Let me say this again. It's easy to hear what I'm saying and listen, but maybe the words are not quite landing. You don't get what you want, you get who you are. So if we're talking about achievements and goals and becoming, if you feel like I have to wait until I open my shop to feel like a successful business owner, as a salon owner, what I'm suggesting to you is a salon owner now, who you are, opens a salon. The achievement comes after the recognition of who you are. And so many times we wait until a thing happens, until we say that's who we are. But in effect, I'm saying you become that first. You assume you're already a successful salon owner, and then you open your salon as a result. According to Neville, he determined something very specific, your self-concept. This is that quiet, persistent assumptions that you hold about yourself. Underneath everything, this is who you believe you are. This is where everything that you do comes from. I kid you not. The human mind works very meticulously. Your brain, the way that your habits are set up and your character and your personality, all that stuff drives from your set of beliefs. People who get up and go to work every day have a belief that it is something that they need to do. Why? They've been taught it, they've seen it, they believed it. Because there are a certain number of people that don't get up and go to work every day for the same reason. They don't believe that's something they need to do because it's not a part of their core beliefs. You have a variety and a very diverse variety of people who believe different things, and it's based on what they believe. They do different things based on what they believe. No one does anything that they don't believe they should do. No one doesn't. I don't care if it's something that you say you didn't mean to do, that at a subconscious level, you have a belief that supports what you did. If you are rude to people, that is something that you believe you have the ability to do, and therefore you do it. If you are kind to people, that is a belief system that you have internal, that is something deep seated within you, something you believe. Now, self-concept. That's a phrase that gets used a lot in psychology. So let's clear up something and determine how I'm using it here. Your self-concept isn't what you say about yourself. It's not what you say. It isn't your affirmations or your goals or your identity, your self-identity. You're consciously building all the time. That's not what it is. It is the assumptions that you hold when you're not trying to hold anything. It's the assumptions you hold when you're not trying to hold anything. This is who at the core you believe yourself to be. It's what you assume when someone gives you a compliment. It's, when someone gives you a compliment and you deflect. It's what you assume when when an opportunity shows up and your first thought is, I'm probably not ready for that. This is your self-concept. Maybe I'm not ready for that. I can't do that job, or I'm not qualified enough. That's your self-concept about yourself. It's what you assume when things go well and you wait for the other shoe to drop. That ever happened to you? You meet someone, you've not had the best, run of meal as it relates to dating lately, and you meet this perfect lady, this perfect gentleman. And for weeks, everything's been going fine, but you're just waiting for the second shoe to drop. That says something about you, not about the other person. And what is it? It's your self-concept. It's what you believe about yourself. Maybe you believe that you're not cut out for dating, or you're not someone that people want to date, or you don't have a great personality, or you're not worth attracting a high-level type of individual. Maybe that's what you believe about yourself. These are quiet background assumptions that we all hold them in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Never call them your state of consciousness. I want to just kind of break in here because I wanted to share with you one of the primary definitions for consciousness that I always hold. And I heard this from Eckhart Tolle. And it's a very simple but pragmatic way of thinking about awareness and consciousness. So when he was asked what separates, like, how do you define consciousness and people who consider themselves conscious? And this is what he said. There's a slight difference between a person who considers himself conscious and a person who's unconscious. And he said the only difference between a person who's conscious versus a person who's not, let's say, is the conscious person thinks about his thoughts. The unconscious person thinks he is his thoughts. So understanding that you are not your mind, you're not your thoughts, but you have a mind and you have thoughts is a very different level of awareness versus someone who thinks they are their mind. And every thought that comes, that's them, that's them, that's them. Like it's just constant. I want to stick that in there because it's important that you understand when I talk about consciousness, what I'm talking about. So Neville stated that the state is already creating your life, whether you know it or not. Whether you believe it or not, it is constantly creating your life. It's not your goals and not the things that you want, not your effort. It's your state. It's your state of consciousness. Here's a way I think about this that might make it more tangible. Imagine two people, the same skill set, same information, same opportunity in front of them. One of them, underneath everything, quietly assumes, hey, I know how to navigate this. I'm the kind of person who figures things out. That's me. Okay, that's person number one. Person number two says, underneath everything, quietly they assume, I'm still getting there. I haven't quite earned this yet. I don't know enough to navigate this successfully. Same action, different assumptions, over time, very different life experiences. This is why two people can follow the same strategy, let's say, same strategy, and they can arrive at two very different places in life. It's not the strategy. It's the identity from which the strategy is being executed, i.e. their self-concept. So Neville put it in this way. The world is a mirror. I love when he talks about mirror work. And one day we're going to do a podcast. We're going to dig deep into this because it is incredibly beneficial and eye-opening. The mirror being a portal. It reflects back the state that you're in. And if you want a different reflection, you don't fight the mirror, you shift the state. You can't get upset at your reflection for being unhappy. If you want to see a smile in the mirror, the only way to do it is if you smile. Now, I want to talk about something a little bit more specific that Neville said, because I think it's the most practical thing in all of his teaching. He said that the assumption, for example, the assumption that you hold about yourself, your self-concept, it is not fixed. It is not in stone. It's not something that you were born with and you're stuck with that can't change. It's something that you can change, not by working harder, not by hustling, not by accomplishing more or whatever it is that you think the actual action will be, but by learning to inhabit a different assumption about who you are. And right off, many people's mind will say, could it be that simple? Well, I do think from a concept standpoint, it's simple, but actually implementing this is not that simple, because the same mind that is in place to try to protect you is going to only argue for things that it has seen before and that are safe. So it knows who you think you are now. And if that self-concept doesn't work for you, when you change the way that you see yourself and you want to inhabit a different assumption about yourself, you will have to fight some thoughts. That's the whole game. Is it simple? Conceptually, yes. Is it difficult to do? Possibly. But the more that you do it, the more you're able to do it. Okay? All right. So again, Neville said by inhabiting a different assumption about who you are, that's the game changer. Actually, that's the whole game. And it's both simpler and harder, like I said, than it sounds. So let's talk about that for a little bit so I can tell you what I mean. It's simpler because it doesn't require any, effort. Quite honestly, it doesn't require more effort. You just have to change your thought. You don't need to add another practice. You don't need to add another routine. You don't need to add another goal or achievement. You just need to shift what you're quietly assuming about yourself while you do the things that you're already doing. Just assume you are a winner. Assume you are successful. Assume you are abundant. All the opposites of the negativity that you kind of kick back to yourself every day, just assume the other side of the coin. It's harder because most of us have deeply grooved assumptions about ourselves that, quite honestly, maybe we're not aware of all of them. We've been running the same background narrative for so long about ourselves that it feels like it's true. I have trouble dating. I don't get along with women. I don't get along with men. I have trouble working for men. I have trouble working for women. I don't do well in large groups, or, I'm no good by myself. All of these narratives that you've been running, for years, It feels true, but it doesn't have to be. So let's change the narrative. Let's get to the already am part. Let's get practical because this is a teaching show, and I want to leave you with a practice. Like I said, this is not about just philosophy. I want you to leave today with something that you can actually do, something you can actually use, something you can actually implement. So this is the good part. I want to introduce you to what I call the already am practice. Okay, already am. And I'm going to walk you through it in a way that you can start using it today, not after you've read, several more books or downloaded this or followed somebody on Instagram. And here's the way this starts. For the next 24 hours, what I want you to do is just one thing, and that is notice the delay phrases. What's a delay phrase? I'm glad you asked. A delay phrase is anytime you say out loud or internally something that places your identity in the future. Examples: when I become, once I finally, I'm working toward, or I'm working toward becoming someone who. Someday I'll be kind. Someday I'll be this kind of a person. Someday I'll be the kind of person who. When I'm further along, I'll. All of these are future statements. These phrases feel completely normal because you probably said them many times before. They do feel motivational. They feel like honesty, like you're being realistic about who you are right now. Like, I know I'm not that person now, but I'm working toward that person. But here's the problem. But here's what they're actually doing. They're encoding a delay. Every single time that you use one of these, you are quietly reinforcing your assumption, the assumption that you are not currently now that person, that who you want to be is not who you are right now. And that doesn't have to be true. You're pushing the identity further away from you, further in time, forward in time, into a future that requires more evidence. Hear me clearly, that future requires more evidence before it's allowed to arrive. In other words, you don't get to the good part because you keep pushing it down the road. And every time you push it down the road, it requires more evidence to get to it. And this happens quietly, but it happens constantly, consistently, normally not out loud. It's a narrative that plays on repeat in your mind. Because I've caught myself doing this dozens of times. In a single day, dozens of times, and you just need to start paying attention to it, to where you want to rephrase it. So let's get to that part. This is the second part. Well, on the first part, don't judge it, just notice it, and don't try to force yourself to stop it. And I'm going to tell you why. When you catch a delay phrase, all I want you to do is pause. And instead of, pushing to the future, you just simply replace whatever you're saying with I already am. I already am. This is not a performance. It's not about faking it till you make it. This is not a forced belief. This is not a toxic positivity where you're pretending things are different than what they are. I'm not asking you to pretend like reality doesn't exist. As a quiet internal question, what would it feel like to already be this person right now in this moment? What would that feel like? Just ask yourself that question. Sit in that for a few moments. Notice how you feel. Notice what comes up. That thing you've been wanting, relationship, the business, the health, the wealth, whatever it is, what would it feel like right now if you're already that person? That really was the core question that Neville would always ask. Here's what I've observed. This is the part that may surprise people, that you often know exactly what it feels like. You often know exactly what it feels like. You felt glimpses of it before. There are moments in your life, maybe in a conversation, for example, maybe in a creative flow state, maybe in a, quiet morning meditation before everything starts, where you briefly inhabit the person you're trying to become. For a brief minute in time, you're that person, and you feel it. And then you step back out of it because something in you says, that's not really you yet. That's not really me yet. That was a fluke. Don't get ahead of yourself. So many people do suffer with, and suffer is probably strong, but deal with imposter syndrome, where they think they don't have enough credit or experience, whatever it is, to inhabit that person yet. The practice, quite honestly, is to stop stepping back, stay in the moment. Is to stay in that felt sense, even for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, a minute, for whatever length of time you can, to let yourself inhabit it without immediately dismissing it as premature. What does that person notice in a room? This is you now. This is your highest self. How do you hold a conversation when you're that best self? What's the quality of your attention when you sit down at work? How do you handle setbacks? Not with false positivity, but with the grounded sense that that person that you've become can navigate through this. You don't have to pretend this. You don't have to pretend the external circumstances are any different. They can be what they are. Your bank account can be what it is. Your follower account can be what it is. Your situation and relationship can be what it is. You don't deny any of that. You're just choosing to inhabit the internal state of a person you're becoming, that you, let's say it better, a person you are right now. Since we're saying I am, let's say you are right now in this body, in this moment. What would this best version of myself do in this situation? Rather than waiting for external evidence to grant you permission to feel it. That's the already am practice. That's it. It's quiet, it's gentle, it doesn't require some sort of transformational calendar or change your morning or evening routine. It just requires your attention. As you're talking to yourself throughout the day, your willingness to stop postponing your own identity. I want to give you one more piece, before we move on, because it's important. This is not about passivity. I want you to be really clear about just not being passive, because I know how the teaching may feel and could land if you're not really have your listening ears on. It can sound like just believe you're already there and the universe will handle it. And a lot of that is true, but I want to add this to it. That's not exactly what I'm saying. You will still take action, because faith without works is dead. You have to do something. You will have to show up. You'll still have to do the work. None of that changes. What changes is the quality from which you act, the consciousness from which you act, the motivation from which you act. That's the quality that makes an enormous difference. So when your actions come from an already am identity, from a quiet, settled sense of who you already are, they're very different. They're less frantic. They're less driven by pressure or need to prove something or catch up. They're more driven in a genuine choice. They're more aligned with what actually will work and what you really want to create in the end, rather than what you feel you have to do to produce or to justify people or circumstances or events. That's the shift. Not less action, but different action. Action from a different center. And honestly, that's also what slow living is really about. For those of you who've been, drawn to that movement, it's not about doing less. It's about doing things from a place of genuine choice rather than compulsive urgency. It's about removing the performance layer from your daily life and finding out what's really underneath it. What's underneath it? When you quiet everything down, it's usually an identity that was already whole in the first place. Okay? Let's slow down for a moment before we get ready to end the episode. I'm going to give you a second just to kind of hold and kind of take everything in. I always tell you, please listen to the podcast over again, because this is full, and you're going to hear it differently the second time, but you'll hear more. I don't want you to leave this episode feeling like you have a new thing to optimize or a new technique to add to your stack or some sort of new note to take. That's not the spirit of this podcast. Let me offer you something very simple to take out of here, to take away. It's just one question. It's just one. Here it is. Where in your life have you been postponing your own identity? Where in your life have you been postponing your own identity? Not where have you been lazy or not working hard enough. That's not the question. Where have you been waiting for something external to arrive or happen for you to be your best self, for you to allow yourself to feel like the person you already are? In some quiet part of you, you know yourself you to be already. Sit with that. You don't have to solve it today. You don't have to write a plan around it. And you don't have to journal it tonight. What I want you to do is just think of it. In my experience, awareness is most of the practice. Once you see the delay clearly, once you can catch it in real time, the shift begins to happen on its own. If you know anything about quantum physics and mechanics, the particle doesn't move until it is noticed, until some attention is put on it. So not perfectly, not permanently, not at all at once, but this begins now. And for today, that's going to be enough. That's enough. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Listen to it again. Listen to it again. Even going through it with my notes and just kind of teaching and going through it with you, I always hear more than what's on my notes because it just comes up